When 17-year-old Eli Harper returned to his hometown of Red Grove for his father's funeral, he was met with a monstrous act of injustice. His entire family was being hanged for treason that never happened. Behind this atrocity stood the corrupt Judge Benedict and Sheriff Crow, ruthlessly seizing the property of the innocent. But this tragedy didn't break Eli. It transformed him into an elusive hunter, sworn to vengeance. Discover how, leaving a sinister mark of 3 bullets, he delivers his own brand of justice and cleanses the town of its corruption. When 17-year-old Eli Harper barely held his breath as the stagecoach finally rolled into Red Grove. The air here was always thick with the scent of pines and damp earth, but today something was off. Instead of the usual clamor of the main intersection, where the voices of merchants and the laughter of children usually echoed, there was a heavy silence. Eli had come for his father's funeral, but he was met not with grief, but with a premonition of disaster that hung in every dusty alley. Barely stepping down from the stagecoach, he froze. Right on the main street, surrounded by a detachment of armed men, his mother, Emily Harper, was being led away, her face pale and distorted with terror. His younger brother, 10-year-old Caleb, clung to her skirt, tears streaming down his cheeks, and their cousin, old Jed, who held himself stoically, but in his eyes read pain and bewilderment. The crowd, usually noisy and curious, stood frozen, as if paralyzed by fear. They were being led to the gallows in the town square. Eli lunged forward, shouting, "It's a mistake! Mama! Caleb!" He was knocked to the ground by 2 burly deputies. The sheriff, his face impenetrable, stood at the foot of the scaffold, holding a scroll. "In the name of law and justice, for treason and conspiracy with raiders, condemned to death by hanging." His voice echoed across the square, cold and merciless. Eli saw his mother raise her eyes to him, full of pleading and farewell. Caleb, his little brother, who was so proud of his older brother, looked at him with unbearable despair. Eli was restrained, his screams muffled by a rough gag. He was dragged along the dusty road to a filthy cell in the town precinct. Locked in there, he could only hear the muffled shouts of the crowd, the last breaths of his family, muted by distance, but not by his pain. He spent a full day in a nightmarish wait, his mind swirling between fury and disbelief. When the next day the old taciturn guard opened the door and released him without a word, Eli ran out into the square. There was no one there but fresh traces from the gallows and an ominous silence. His family was gone. Shock and pain merged into one, turning into a burning ember inside his chest. He knew this wasn't just the law. This was a monstrous, crushing injustice. Eli wandered through the town like a ghost. Every glance, every whispered word only intensified his pain. The rumors, which once seemed like wild gossip, now became a horrifying reality. People said that Judge Benedict, always so pious and respected, and Sheriff Crow, with his formidable appearance, were actually dividing the land and livestock of the executed traitors. They declared undesirable citizens who owned fertile lands or valuable property as conspirators with raiders, and then ruthlessly confiscated their property, reselling it for a pittance to their cronies. The town lived by these unspoken laws. The fear was so strong that even the priest averted his eyes when he met Eli. Unable to offer comfort or truth, Eli understood. Justice here was dead. He had nowhere to turn. He couldn't just leave, leaving his family unavenged. A fire burned in his heart, refusing to let him give up. He was taken in by his father's old friend, Marcus Flint, a former bounty hunter whose face was covered in scars and whose eyes seemed to see right through everything. Marcus, who himself had lost loved ones to corruption many years ago, knew this pain. He listened to Eli in silence, seeing in his eyes not just grief, but a cold, steely determination. It was Marcus who told Eli about a secret brotherhood, an ancient, unregistered order formed back in colonial times. They were called the Silent Hounds. These were former officers, hunters, scholars, exiles, and survivors who dispensed their own justice where the law had become a tool of power. They operated in the shadows, cleansing the land of corruption when official justice was blind or bought. They hunt the wolves when the shepherds themselves become wolves, Marcus rasped, looking Eli straight in the eye. He offered Eli a choice: either flee and forget, or join the Silent Hounds and become an instrument of retribution. Eli, without hesitation, chose the latter path. His anger was too strong, his pain too deep to simply leave. For the first time since that terrible day, a faint but persistent hope that he could restore justice began to stir in his soul. Joining the Brotherhood was tough. Marcus Flint became for Eli not only a mentor, but also a stern teacher. Days and nights Eli spent learning to shoot, to move stealthily, to fight hand-to-hand in the art of survival. He learned to read tracks, to blend with shadows, to think like his enemies. The physical trials hardened his body, but Marcus's lessons hardened his spirit. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, Eli," Marcus repeated. "But before serving it, you need to know exactly who ordered that dish." Eli took an oath, sealing it with blood and pain, promising to become an instrument of retribution. His first assignment, his baptism by blood, was to eliminate Judge Benedict's informant, a certain Norman Dawson. Dawson was a petty shopkeeper who for years had been feeding Benedict information about unreliable citizens, pointing out those whose lands and property might appeal to the judge and sheriff. He was a vile, cowardly man whose name Eli had heard in the whispers of the townspeople. Eli tracked Dawson, who was returning home after a secret meeting with one of the sheriff's deputies. The night was moonless, and Dawson, as always, walked through the dark alleys, confident in his impunity. Eli acted coldly and precisely. He eliminated Dawson without witnesses, leaving his body where it would only be found in the morning. He did this not for glory, not for the Brotherhood. It was for his mother, who prayed for truth until the very end. For his brother, who believed in justice. For his father, who was killed not on the farm, but in the very heart of the law. For the first time since his family's death, Eli felt something akin to schadenfreude. Not sadistic pleasure, but a deep satisfaction from the retribution served. Now Eli had a purpose, a connection to the Silent Hounds, honed skills, weapons, and a map of Red Grove. Marked on it were the homes of the 6 who had signed his family's death warrant. Judge Benedict, Sheriff Crow, 3 jurors who had delivered the false verdict, and one of the wealthy farmers who had received the confiscated Harper lands. One by one, they would disappear, and each time before their disappearance, an ominous sign would appear in the town. 3 crossed bullets burned into the doors of their homes. This was his personal symbol, a warning and a promise of inevitable punishment. Red Grove, once bound by fear, was now to learn what true terror felt like when justice came from the shadows. The first to disappear after Dawson was one of the jurors, Farmer Silas Groves, who shamelessly appropriated a portion of the Harper's livestock. The next morning, the sign of the 3 bullets was found on the doors of his house. The town buzzed. Fear turned into panic. Sheriff Crow and Judge Benedict increased patrols, but it didn't help. A week later, the second juror, moneylender Elias Stone, known for his greed, vanished without a trace. Again, 3 bullets on the door. Eli acted silently like a shadow. He used his skills taught by Marcus, penetrating the most guarded homes, leaving no trace. He didn't kill out of cruelty, only out of necessity. Each victim was guilty, and each received what they deserved. He saw how fear consumed those who once felt all-powerful. His schadenfreude grew with each disappearance, fueling his resolve. It was the turn of the 3rd juror and the farmer who had seized the lands. Their disappearances were just as sudden and inexplicable. Townspeople began to suspect that something more than mere bandits was behind these events. Rumors of a curse, of a hunter of traitors, began to circulate in Red Grove. Fear paralyzed those who had previously remained silent and forced those who were afraid to speak. Soon, only Sheriff Crow remained. Eli decided to make his disappearance public, to give the town a chance for redemption. He left a note, signed with 3 bullets, on the precinct door, promising Crow swift retribution. Sheriff Crow, mad with fear, locked himself in his office. The night was tense. Eli, using everything Marcus had taught him, infiltrated the precinct. The struggle was short and merciless. Crow was caught and vanished without a trace. The burned sign was found on the precinct door. Last was Judge Benedict. He tried to flee, hiring the best bodyguards. But Eli was a shadow that could not be caught. He found Benedict in a neighboring town as he tried to board a train. Eli didn't kill him immediately. he brought him back to Red Grove, to the very square where his family had been executed. He forced Benedict to confess his crimes before the frozen townspeople who had secretly gathered to witness the denouement. Then, without spilling blood, Eli disappeared with the judge. On the scaffold where his family had hung, the burned sign of the 3 bullets appeared. With Benedict's disappearance, silence fell over Red Grove. But it was no longer the silence of fear, but the silence of relief and liberation. The town slowly began to heal. New laws were created, honest officials were appointed. The lands and property of those innocently executed, including the Harper family, were returned to their descendants. The triumph was complete. Eli, observing from afar, felt a deep satisfaction. His pain had not disappeared, but a sense of duty fulfilled had been added to it. He became a symbol of retribution, inspiring many to fight against corruption and injustice. The story of the 17-year-old boy who lost everything and then became an elusive hunter of traitors was passed down by word of mouth, reminding everyone that even in the darkest times, justice can find its way, and that villains, no matter how high they sit, will always reap what they sow.